Hi folks, Dom Lawson here from Metal Hammer magazine. Brain dead. I've been away for a few days and I'm horrendously jet lagged, so I'm going to be even less entertaining and informative than usual, which is probably hard to believe, but I am. I promise. It's good. This is going to be rubbish. But anyway, yes, Iron Sandwich time. And I might just wait for my brain to click in. And yes, today I'm going to be talking to you about an album that came out yesterday, and that I've already reviewed elsewhere. But this is the long, rambling, and pointless review rather than the succinct, well-written one. And it's the new album by Van Halen, which is called A Different Kind of Truth. And I suppose, I mean, you know, if you've been... So I just found something rather unpleasant on my keyboard. If you've been living under a rock, or you couldn't give a flying fuck about Van Halen, then you probably don't know that it's their first album since 1984, literally the year and the album, to feature David Lee Roth as the Van Halen singer. Now, it's one of those things, you know. Van Halen were, with one exception, which was the terrible Van Halen 3, which featured former Extreme and probably current Extreme frontman, I don't know, don't really care, don't like him that much, Gary Cherone, that was just a disastrous record. And anyway, but basically the history of Van Halen, there's been two singers that anybody gives a toss about, and David Lee Roth was the singer for the first 6 albums, and then the 3, I think, after that, was it? I think it must have been, featured Sammy Hagar, and obviously there's a lot of well, I mean, they were hugely successful throughout both periods. I think that's the important thing, really. Van Halen are not a band that have suffered from a lack of success, and certainly Sammy Hagar joining the band was a controversial move. It was controversial because David Lee Roth and Sammy Hagar were known to dislike each other quite a lot, you know, and slagged each other off during the 70s and early 80s. And also, you know, I think when David Lee Roth left after 1984 and the band enlisted Sammy Hagar and made 5150. There was I think a discernible change of sound, really. Although obviously Eddie Van Halen is one of the most important guitar players of all time, you know, and certainly one of the most revolutionary. The band became a more polished and commercial and radio friendly beast on 5150, and you know, they had a massive global hit with Why Can't This Be Love. You know, it's a great album, 5150, but it's for me, having grown up listening to Van Halen, one of those bands that one of the earlier bands that I got into in terms of metal and stuff. There was just the stuff with the Sammy Hagar records just weren't the same, and it's just not as much as I love Montrose, and I like Chicken Foot now, and I do like Sammy Hagar's voice and stuff, and the band makes tequila, so he must be all right. But his politics quite ghastly. But anyway, basically, it was a different thing, and they were even more successful with Sammy Hagar than they were with David Lee Roth. I think they sold millions and millions of copies of 5150 and OU812 and the other one, the FUCK record. But for I guess men of a certain age and women of a certain age, or certainly those with taste, the David Lee Roth era was the era, and those first 6 albums, although patchy in places, certainly Diver Down is one of the classic all filler no killer records. There's a couple of great tracks on it, but it's a pretty tatty affair that was obviously bashed out in about 10 minutes. But those first 6 albums in the main were fantastic and very influential and very exciting. And there was something about Van Halen, they kind of they predated all the kind of LA glam metal and sleaze metal and all that kind of stuff that came out in the mid 80s. They predated it and did it better before everyone else, and they were kind of the link between Kiss and Motley Crue. Somewhere in the middle there's Van Halen, who are better musicians and just simply more charismatic and flamboyant and exciting than virtually anything else around at the time, and from the first album onwards, they were kind of pushing the boundaries a bit of especially in terms of guitar playing, and they were just a thrilling band, and I think the problem since David Lee Roth left, and that's 27 years ago, bear that in mind, or 28 years ago almost, is that the Van Halen for me weren't really Van Halen. It didn't really sound anything like the original stuff, And my favourite Van Halen album is Fair Warning, for instance, which is a fantastic record. It's really heavy. It's got songs like Unchained on it and Mean Street, and it's just it was a really gritty record, and nothing they did with Sammy Hagar was gritty. It was polished and kind of a little bit smug sounding, really. So the fact that David Lee Roth is back is, kind of with reservations, of course, for celebration. I mean, the reservations are that, if you've been following the kind of soap opera behind the scenes of Van Halen, Eddie Van Halen's had a lot of problems with drink. David Lee Roth's kind of staggered around doing, ill-advised solo tours where he hasn't really done himself a lot of favours. None of them have produced any music that's particularly worth paying attention to. Like Van Halen 3 with Gary Sharon was awful, and David Lee Roth, as far as I'm aware, has done virtually nothing. I mean, he made one solo album well over a decade ago, and that was nothing to get excited about. Well, I mean, maybe he's done another one since then, but that's the thing, no one really cares because he's not done anything particularly good since leaving Van Halen. So, his solo stuff's good, actually. To be fair, the first couple of solo albums are great. Skyscraper's brilliant, but just like Living in Paradise and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, anyway, so he's back. And when I heard that, I thought, this is great, this is good news, let's hope they can make a decent record. Now, the other thing that's changed in the interim is that Michael Anthony, the bass player from Van Halen for all those years, is now hooked up with Sammy Hagar again in Chickenfoot with Joe Satriani and Chad Smith from the Chili Peppers. And so now Van Halen, the lineup is Alex Van Halen on the drums, Eddie Van Halen on the guitar, and Eddie's son Wolfgang, who's 20, on the bass, with David Lee Roth on vocals. And so A Different Kind of Truth is not just, it's not just the return of David Lee Roth, it's also a kind of a new lineup, and it's interesting to see how, three members of the Van Halen family click together musically. Well, I listened to this album on the first time I heard it on a stream, which is never the best way to listen to things because you don't really get a full sense of the production or the sound of anything. But within 2 songs, I was almost jumping up and down and going, "This is fucking brilliant." I could say that the simple way of reviewing this album is that A Different Kind of Truth is the best Van Halen album since 1984. That is just there's no doubt about it, and that it very much taps into what made them brilliant the first time round, and particularly the 2 albums that I love the most from the early Van Halen era, which is Women and Children First and Fair Warning. It's very much in that vein. Now, you may have heard Tattoo, you may have heard the whole thing because it came out yesterday, but Tattoo is it's not the greatest song that Van Halen have ever put out, but I think 2 or 3 listens and it's got me hooked. It's kind of, it's a great mixture of killer guitar playing, a really kind of tight groove, and David Lee Roth being a lunatic. And David Lee Roth is a proper mental. If you've read that, there's an interview that he's just done with Michael Hann at The Guardian, which is well worth reading because he's obviously a fiercely intelligent bloke, but he's also an absolute fruitcake. And I think that's something that Sammy Hagar couldn't really offer to Van Halen, and that magic of the combination of Eddie Van Halen's amazing guitar playing and David Lee Roth, who's just a born frontman, with a sometimes remarkable, sometimes terrible voice, but there's something about him that he has a personality that's so enormous that it kind of carries any song along with it, no matter how thin, and some of the original Van Halen albums, first 6 albums, some of the songs on there are pretty thin in terms of, structure and melody and stuff. There's not a lot going on, other than Eddie Van Halen playing like a demon. But anyway, this album is phenomenal. I think it's fantastic. It's the most fun album I've heard in a long time, and I think that's the great thing about it. It really does recapture what made Van Halen so ridiculously entertaining in the first place. And I mean, it just going through the tracks. I mean, I can do a boring track by track for you, but I won't. But there's certain things on here that you kind of want from a Van Halen album, and She's the Woman, I believe, is a song that was actually originally from the demo that got Van Halen signed. I think it's a really old song from the 1976 demo that they made that got them signed to Warner Brothers in the first place. But it's brilliant. I mean, and that thing, it fits seamlessly onto this record, which I guess tells its own story, But some of the highlights of this album for me, there's a song called Chinatown, which is just, there's 3 songs, I can't remember the third one, but anyway, Chinatown and Bullethead are both, if you like Eddie Van Halen's guitar playing, and let's face it, if you don't, you're a mental, it's just he goes off like a flipping rocket on it, you know, and any sense that he's, you know, that his problems with drink and everything have kind of diminished his talent in some way go out the window very quickly when you hear him play on this album. He's absolutely phenomenal and on fire throughout. And Chinatown is like one of those raging Fair Warning style heavy Van Halen tracks. It's just brilliant. Bullethead is virtually punk rock. It's 2.5 minutes. It's, you know, it's leery. It's ridiculous. It's got blazing solos on it. Wolfgang Van Halen, bass player, is a revelation on this album because not only does he, you know, the chemistry between him and Alex and Eddie is just phenomenal, but he's a killer player. I mean, he's 20 years old and just really, really good. You know what I mean? I feel like giving up listening to that, really. There's some really great stomping, groovy, slower mid-tempo tracks, like As Is brilliant. There's a song called Big River, which again has just got that totally classic Van Halen feel to it. It could have fitted on any of the first 6 albums, really, and just the production's. What I love about it is the production's not raw. Sorry, it's not. It is raw. It's not overly polished. It's a very well produced record, but it's got that kind of that feel of a band playing in a room, and a kick-ass rock and roll band that have jammed together, and the songs feel like they've got a jammy feel to them, but they're still very well structured, and they've all got big hooks. And this song, Big River, I think really sums up what's great about the album. If you can listen to one track to kind of see if you fancy buying the new Van Halen album or not, check out Big River. I think it's great. It really kind of sums up their sound, but shows that they've kind of, you know, that the current lineup is more than able to whip up a similar storm of excitement. The same as the original lineup, you know. What else is there? There's just so many great tracks in it. It's 13 songs. It flies by. It's only 50 minutes long. It's not one of these overtly long albums that seem to be so popular at the moment, where people just cram everything they've got onto it. I mean, it's just, you know, She's the Woman, incredibly catchy. Tattoo, incredibly catchy. Blood and Fire's a great song. Wow, man, there's so many. And there's also, you know, if you're knowledgeable when it comes to Van Halen, you'll know about songs like Ice Cream Man and some of the quirkier stuff that the band did. Well, there's a song called Stay Frosty on it, which is almost like a showcase for David Lee Roth's kind of insanity, you know. It's kind of quirky and bizarre and slightly ludicrous and wonderful, you know. And I just think I listened to this with a well-known drummer from a very popular metal band a few days ago, who's a massive Van Halen fan, and was actually quite nervous about listening to it, you know, because it's one of his favourite bands, and he wasn't sure, you know, how he was going to feel about it. And I said, I promise you, it's a good album. And we stuck it on, and at the end of it, he virtually had tears in his eyes. He was so chuffed, you know. It's if you love the first 6 Van Halen albums, A Different Kind of Truth is killer. It's a great record. It's a massive return to form. It's, you know, I don't know, what can I say? I heartily recommend it. I think there's not enough. It's in the same way that the Wolfsbane album, Wolfsbane Saved the World, really put a smile on my face and made me feel, you know, kind of took me back to that you know, that young age when you discover heavy music and hard rock and heavy metal, and it's kind of all exciting and it puts a smile on your face. The new Van Halen album, it does exactly that as well, and I think it's kind of, you know, it should be the soundtrack to our summer, I think. You know, I mean, I don't know if they're going to be playing any of the UK festivals, but if they are, then I think it's they've got, you know, you've got to be there. You've got to go and see Van Halen, because, you know, I've never seen them live, I've got to be honest. So, and I didn't want to go and see them live when Sammy Hagar was in the band, which is when I could have actually gone. So I think it'll be phenomenal. When you think how many great songs they've got already up their sleeve, and then they've got this whole album of great songs. There's no like weak tracks on this album. It's solid from start to finish, and brilliant fun. And there you go. That's enough waffling, I think. Anyway, A Different Kind of Truth by Van Halen is available now from all good record shops and online and whatever. I recommend it highly to you. And of course, if you hate Van Halen and think they're rubbish, then you probably won't like it. But other than that, I think pretty much anyone who watches this will dig it. And it's great to have them back, I've got to say. It's been a long time since I've given a toss about a Van Halen album, that's for damn sure. So there you go, that's enough waffle for today. Cheerio. See you again for another Iron Sandwich at some point, maybe. Who knows? Cheers, bye.